as we keep moving along. Stand at the shores of the sea, fearful we want to turn back. The sea parts, our eyes fill with wonder as we go along on our journey. Erev Tov, I'm so glad you joined us this evening to celebrate the life and music of Debbie Friedman on her 10th Yortzeit. Her journey, though cut short at 59 years, was a full and bountiful journey. If you don't know her name, chances are you know her music. Lechi lach, to a land that I will show you. Lech lecha, to a place you do not know. Lechi lach, on your journey I will bless you, and you shall be a blessing. You shall be a blessing. You shall be a blessing. Lechi lach. This song was inspired by the Torah portion Lech Lecha, where God tells Abraham to go out and create a Jewish world. The feminist that Debbie Friedman was, she enriched the text to include Sarah by saying, Lechi lach, the feminine of go out, to send the message that God wants all to go out and make our world better. And you shall be a blessing. You shall be a blessing. You shall be a blessing. Lechi lach. Yes, Debbie empowered all of us to be a blessing with her words and her melodies. But how did Debbie evolve into the amazing Jewish composer, performer, and teacher? A little history. Debbie Friedman was born on February 23, 1951 in Utica, New York. Debbie learned to love Judaism from her bubby and Zadie, traditional Jews who lived upstairs in a two-family house. When she was 5 years old, her father, a kosher butcher, decided to move the family to St. Paul, Minnesota. There, the Friedmans joined Mount Zion, a Reform congregation, and sent Debbie and her two older sisters to a conservative religious school. She first picked up a guitar at the age of 16, inspired by a fellow counselor at Herzl Camp in Wisconsin. At home, she continued to teach herself to play the guitar, mostly by listening to Peter, Paul, and Mary records, though Debbie loved all kinds of music, including classical music and orchestral music. In 1968, she began song leading for her synagogue's youth group, which led her to attending a song leader workshop at the UAHC Kutz Camp Institute in Warwick, New York. During Debbie's formative years, as she sat in synagogue services, she felt that something was missing for both her and for those she observed. She identified with other young people whose Judaism had no language that spoke to them or for them. She told the Los Angeles Times in 1995, "One night I went to synagogue and realized sitting there I was bored. I realized the rabbi was talking and the choir was singing and nobody was doing anything. There was no participation." In 1970, she wrote her first song, an English setting of Ve'ahavta. She was on a bus ride and a melody came into her head. And so she took the English translation of Ve'ahavta, which in those days was, "and thou shalt love." Now we sing, and you shall love. Well, she put the melody to the English prayer. And you shall love Adonai your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your and all these words which I command you on this day shall be in your heart, shall be in your heart, that you will remember and do all of my commandments and be holy. A month later, she taught it to those attending a regional youth convention. Debbie was thrilled with how this musical setting was received. She wrote, "Not only did they sing the Wehrhafte, they stood arm in arm. They were moved. They were crying. Here was something in a genre to which they could relate." In 1972, Debbie recorded her first album, Sing Unto God, a compilation of Shabbat songs featuring a high school choir. The record sold like hotcakes at camp, and that's how it all started. She wrote many of her early songs while she was a song leader at youth organizations and camps around the country. A year later, Debbie moved to Chicago, where she taught religious school, directed a youth group, and sometimes led services. Soon she was playing occasional concerts. Debbie used music to express her Judaism. She translated and transformed prayers, Torah, Talmud, and other scholarly texts, both ancient and contemporary. Her compositions are written for life cycle events, holidays, observances marking the Jewish calendar, world events, and much more. Debbie's amazing sense of humor is reflected in the lyrics of numerous songs. And on Thanksgiving, Debbie wrote this song. Happy Thanksgiving, hooray, hooray, hooray. Aren't you glad you're not a turkey on this Thanksgiving Day? Happy Thanksgiving, hooray, hooray, hooray. Aren't you glad you're not a turkey on this Thanksgiving Day? And then, on the holiday of Shavuot, she wrote this. Oh, there were 613 commandments that Moses handed to us. As we stood at the foot of the mountain of Sinai, our dear Moses started to fuss. He threw the tablets down to the ground, and much to our surprise, the 10 commandments broke into pieces, and we couldn't believe our eyes. And who could forget the song we all sing on Hanukkah? I am a latke, I am a latke, and I am waiting for Hanukkah to come. I am a latke, I am a latke, and I am waiting for Hanukkah to come. But in the midst of the humor, Debbie's passion always came out, and she had such a passion for social justice. And so she wrote this verse. It's important that I have an understanding of what it is that I'm supposed to do. You see, there are many who are homeless, with no jobs, no clothes, and very little food. It's so important that we all remember that while we have most of the things we need, we must remember those who have so little. We must help them, we must be the ones to feed. I am a latke, I am a latke, and I am waiting for Hanukkah to come. I am a latke, I am a latke, and I am waiting for Hanukkah to come. Debbie's songs taught the Hebrew language. Here's a fun video of our Bethel kids and our wonderful cantorial soloist, Michelle Oslander-Cohen. Aleph, Bet, Bet.
Aleph, Bet, Bet.
Gimel, Dalet, Hey.
Gimel, Dalet, Hey.
Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet.
Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet.
Yud, Kaf, Chaf.
Yud, Kaf, Chaf.
Lamed, Mem, Nun.
Lamed, Mem, Nun.
Samech, Ayin, Pei, Fei.
Samech, Ayin, Pei, Fei.
Sadi, Kuf, Resh.
Sadi, Kuf, Resh.
In the 1980s, Debbie served as the cantorial soloist for 3 years at the New Reformed Congregation in Los Angeles, California. At Osrui, she served as a music educator. She directed the music component of its intensive Hebrew Chalutzim program and created Hava Neshira, the popular annual song leading and music workshop. And I was honored to attend Hava Neshira when Debbie was there. I participated in a few of her sessions that were so deep and meaningful. But the most unforgettable was at a late night song session, when each of the esteemed faculty got up and led a song or two, lifting our spirits, wowing us with their compositions or deeply musical settings. Well, Debbie was the last to go on, and she chose to lead us in the singing of Leavin' on a Jet Plane. She had written hundreds of songs. Now, why did she lead us in that song? And why was it the most inspiring moment of the evening? Because Debbie knew how to get people to sing about love together. She turned Leavin' on a Jet Plane into a holy moment when we were one, connected to each other. Kiss me and smile for me. Tell me that you'll wait for me. Hold me like you'll never let me go. Debbie was a teacher. She could turn any moment into a divine moment where your soul went somewhere it had never been. People of all ages were mesmerized with Debbie. She appeared before national conventions and conferences for every Jewish organization. And in 1996, she sold out Carnegie Hall in celebration of her 25th year as a performer and released a 2-record set of the event. She released 20 albums between 1972 and 2010. Debbie performed in hundreds of cities around the globe, including right here at Temple Beth El. I will never forget sitting with my daughter Lizzie, she was about 5 or 6 at the time, and sharing that experience with her, both of us captivated by Debbie. A decade later, I watched my daughter lead music composed by Debbie. Debbie inspired so many women to raise their voice in song, especially with this song.
Once they got across the other side, she picked up her timbrel in her hand. And the women dancing with their timbrels followed Miriam as she sang a song. Sing a song, we're the friends. Miriam and the women danced and danced all night long. Same thing again. One which sang our history. With every thread and every strand, she crafted her delight. A woman touched with spirit, she dances toward the light. Hey.
On January 29th, we will be celebrating the life and music of Debbie Friedman on Shabbat Shirah, the Sabbath of Song. On this special Shabbat, we read the Song of the Sea in the Torah. And when the sea parted, it was Miriam who raised her timbrel and led the women in song. So what better composer to celebrate on Shabbat Shirah than Debbie, who gave kavod to the voice of the woman? We are surrounded by strong women at Beth El. One who will be joining us this evening, my friend and colleague Robin Eisenberg, is the Emerita Director of Jewish Learning and Living at Temple Beth El. For 33 years, she directed our religious school, and Robin was a personal friend of Debbie Friedman's. So I'd like to welcome Robin to our special evening. Robin, it's so good to have you here with us this evening. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Lori. I'm so excited that you invited me to be part of this special program.
It is our pleasure and honor to have you with us this evening. So tell me, how did you meet Debbie?
So in 1968, I was going into my senior year in high school, and The congregation I belonged to in Allentown, Pennsylvania, sent me to the URJ Kutz Camp in Warwick, New York. And I was doing the Leadership Institute. And there was this girl that was doing a program called Torah Corps. And this girl always had a guitar with her, always had a guitar with her. And it turned out that that was Debbie Friedman. And we sort of lost track of each other for a few years. And then I became a young educator at my synagogue in Allentown. And in 1974, the congregation invited her to come and sing. And we looked at each other and looked at each other. And then we said, Kutz Camp, Warwick, New York. And that was the beginning of almost 40 years of being connected to each other as friends and colleagues.
Yeah, that happens a lot at Kutz. Even my kids went to Kutz, and they're still friends with their friends from Kutz. You have all your friends from Kutz, right?
Absolutely.
So how did you and Debbie become, really good friends, personal friends?
We just kept running into each other, and we had all these common friends, and we had a lot in common, and we sort of fed off of each other. It was great.
That's really
Very
amazing.
special.
So as an educator, from your perspective, what was different and unusual and special about Debbie?
The most special thing about Debbie was her passion. She knew how to excite people about Jewish music. She made her music accessible from the youngest people to the oldest people. And she was able to get everybody standing on their feet and clapping to sitting and being just surrounded by a spiritual moment. She also had the talent of taking texts and making them accessible and come alive through her words and music. And certainly, that she inspired generations of musicians and composers. She really was a pioneer.
Totally. She was so unique, the first of her kind, and so many people followed, right, Robin?
Exactly. I mean, you talk about people like Julie Silver and Craig Taubman, who will point to the moment that Debbie, the first time they heard Debbie and the first time they heard her music. So it really becomes a very, very important part of what Jewish music is today.
So you were friends with her for years. You told me stories for years. Can you share some of those stories about when you were with Debbie?
Sure. So I'd say that there were probably 2 or 3 very, very significant times that I can point to. One was the night before Gary and I got married in Tampa in 1979. The congregation, as a gift to us, brought Debbie in to be part of the Friday night service. And it was a very spiritual moment when she was on the bema with the 2 rabbis that were going to do our wedding. And you just felt her care and her love surrounded me.
That must have been so amazing to have her be there for your blessing, right?
It was almost an out-of-body experience because, she really was singing from her heart. Another time that means a great deal to me is when I was the president of NATE, the National Association of Temple Educators, and the organization invited her to be part of the final banquet. And Debbie, because of my relationship with her, and Debbie decided, rather than accepting an honorarium, that she would donate it to the organization, and they created what's called the Past Presidents Fund. Wow. So every time somebody gets money to attend a conference from that fund, I know it was because of my relationship with her.
That was so generous of her. She was so special to so many people in so many different ways. But Robin, come on, as a girlfriend, I want to hear the funny stuff about Debbie. I know Debbie could be quite a character, right?
Here's one of the most memorable times was it was after the NATE conference, which was in San Diego. Andy and I went to her house in Palm Springs to celebrate New Year's. And there were a lot of people there, and some of them I knew and some of them I didn't know. And Andy is always wanting to be very helpful. So she at 1 a.m., 1:30 a.m. was washing the wine glasses, and a few of them broke.
Oh, no. What was her reaction? What did Debbie do?
So, oh my God. And, it was a bit of chaos, and, she had a dog and we had to clean up the glass from the dog. And it sort of became a legend among a number of our friends about, the wine glasses on a New Year's Eve. But she handled it like a champ, and as always, was able to joke about it.
That's so much fun. You had such a special relationship. It was truly a blessing, wasn't it?
Yeah, so special. And we were exactly the same age. I'm like 6 weeks. My birthday was like 6 weeks before hers.
Wow.
So this time of year is always special because it's our birthdays and it's when she died.
Oh, that's an amazing connection that the two of you had. I want to thank you so much, Robin. You are so special to me and to Temple Bethel.
My
And
pleasure.
I just want to thank you so much, and blessings in this new year.
Thank you so much, Lori. Pleasure to be part of this.
In our temple and most temples everywhere, Debbie Friedman is best known for her setting of Mishaberach, the prayer for healing, which is used by hundreds of congregations all around the world. Let's let Debbie tell us about her Mishaberach in her own words.
Well, we were all beside ourselves and we didn't know what to do. And the morning of that tefillah, the morning of her experience, her service, I remembered that when I was young and when I was a child in like 6th grade, I used to go to junior congregation, and we used to do the Mishaberach, the prayer for healing, at the services. So I went and I got a Siddur, a prayer book, and I opened it up to the prayer, and I read it, and then decided that this is what I have to do. And I translated it, but it wasn't enough just to have the translation, because what I felt was that I needed to reinforce the fact that to confront the things that we have to face, we really need courage. And we need to also, Hayye Bracha, we need to be a blessing. Mishaberach Avoteinu. And that morning we did the service, and we had this huge talit, and we said a prayer shawl that was spread out like a big tabernacle. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help. And we called for people who wanted to engage in a healing prayer to come forward. And there were about 150 people at the service. And when I looked out, every chair was empty and every person had come under the talit, the prayer shawl. And it was the first time that I had sung this. But this has become the most widely used prayer, I think, in the synagogues. One of my students calls it the national anthem. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema. The renewal the renewal of spirit, and let us say,
In 2007, Debbie Friedman was appointed to the faculty of the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. After her death, the cantorial school was renamed the Debbie Friedman School of Sacred Music. When I think about spirituality and healing and the power of music and prayer, I always think about my teacher, who was the director of the cantorial certification program when I was a student at the Debbie Friedman School of Sacred Music, Cantor Dreskin. Ellen was a very close friend and colleague of Debbie's, and I am delighted that she will be joining us this evening. Ellen, thank you so much for joining us this evening. How are you?
I'm doing well, Cantor. It's really good to see you, and thank you for inviting me, for being here.
Oh, it's an honor to have you with us, especially because you had such a close relationship with Debbie. Can you tell me how you met Debbie?
When I was a teenager, I first saw and briefly met Debbie at the URJ Kutz camp in Warwick, New York. I was a camper the summer of 1973, and she came, and I have a vivid memory of her sitting out on the lawn with her guitar and the Kutz camp song leaders, surrounded by campers. And it was a feeling of community and a sound of singing like I really had never heard before. We only met that summer in passing, but just over a year later, Debbie was invited to come to my home congregation in Houston, Texas, Temple Beth Israel, to do a Friday evening service. And I was a freshman in college at the time, and my rabbi called me and asked me to come home and to participate in that Friday night service. Debbie and I ended up spending the entire weekend together, got very close very quickly, and we remained good friends for years and years after that.
That is such a lovely story. Can you tell me what was unique or different about Debbie?
Well, Debbie was very honest, straightforward, and she had amazing ideas that came straight from her heart. And so she was tapping into the things that we all had in common, the emotions about prayer and Judaism and God in all of our hearts. Debbie had the ability to compose music that was many times simple, but not simplistic. Meaning it was accessible. It made the words of the prayers accessible to us. At times it made the whole idea of God accessible to us. And yet it was not boring, and it was not elementary. It was quite profound.
So would you say it was like Jewish folk music?
Jewish folk music, yes, and a term that was coined in the 70s was the term American Nusach. You know, us Jews in every generation, we have borrowed music and other things from the cultures in which we live, and America is no different. And Debbie, having grown up, as many of us did, with Peter, Paul, and Mary, and the Weavers, and Pete Seeger, these were American song leaders. And she saw the power of people singing together in community and what that could do for a group of people. And she was able to harness that and really led the way for all of us to be part of this American Nusach music that sounds completely Jewish and completely American at the same time.
So Debbie created Havana Shira, and I experienced exactly what you spoke about at Havana Shira. Everybody singing together and the power of the voices being together as one. So that song leading workshop program is up at Olin Sang Ruby, and I actually have a picture of you and Debbie. Take a look. Up at Havana Shira that Jeff Klepper sent me. Any comments about that picture? Does it tell a story?
I don't remember the exact moment it was taken. I think looking at it now, the story that it tells is mostly about the times. Everything from looking at how all three of us look a little bit different than we did 20 or so years later, from my platform shoes to my not gray hair, and just the joy on everybody's face. When Debbie got up to lead, she threw her whole self into it and created instant warmth with the communities in front of which she sang, and her exuberance, it was just contagious all the time.
It really was. I loved my summer up there with Debbie. It was so amazing and so transformative for myself and everybody around me. Can you talk about Debbie as a teacher and why she created this program?
Well, she and Jeff Klepper created the program together because they understood that song leading was about so much more than knowing the words and knowing the chords and just getting up there to sing a song. She taught us really with our head to toe song leading, with our entire body and with our hearts, to, as I mentioned before, create relationships with the community and build the community. She had very high standards, and she would say, what are you doing with your eyes? What are you doing with your hands? What are you doing with the guitar? The guitar is a tool. And she made us aware of all of these tools and techniques that we had.
I think that was one of the biggest takeaways I had from Havanashira, how you and Rosalie will use your bodies. And do you remember when we were at HUC and Rosalie was teaching us, and I was like, how do you do this? And I think that comes from exactly what you're talking about Debbie and song leading and turning it into such an art and such a craft, wasn't it? It wasn't haphazard at all.
It was not haphazard at all. And it was also a matter of, again, relating to a group of people from your heart. Debbie was extremely honest, and she said, if you're not feeling it, if you're not sincere about where you hope to take a group of people, if you don't know where you hope to take a group of people, then what are you doing? So she made us look inside ourselves as much as she made us look at the people who surrounded us.
So, Ellen, you started out as a song leader, and then you went to HUC. And I love the story you told us when we were at HUC about when you came to HUC and you had this guitar. And can you tell that story for everybody?
My audition for cantorial school was really, for me, something for the record books. And I'll preface it by saying that this was in 1981, and many, many things have changed since then. But when I was in my cantorial school interview, of course, I brought my guitar with me, and one of the songs that I sang for my audition was a Debbie Friedman tune. And one of the questions that I got, curiously enough, in my audition was, what would your reaction be if we told you that you were not allowed to bring your guitar into the building? I was so taken aback by that. But again, this was 1981. I think that Jeff Klepper had just been ordained as a cantor a year or two before me. And he was one of the few people, I think, that was using the guitar in his cantorate at that point. And so it was a very new idea. When I was asked if I could read Hebrew in that very same interview, and they gave me a siddur and opened it up, and I read the words. I remember it was Lador Vador Nagid God Lecha, etc., etc. And one person on the interview committee said, well, of course she can read that. Debbie Friedman wrote a melody to it. Now, they saw that as something negative. Meanwhile, I'm thinking, well, there's another thing that Debbie Friedman did for all of us, is made Hebrew familiar to many of us again, and insisted that we knew what we were singing about. The cantorial school's very different now.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to ask you is, how did Debbie's work change the cantorate? I mean, what's the difference? I mean, I know the difference between 1981 when you first started and now. What do you think were Debbie's influences?
I think the whole idea, certainly, of instruments other than organ or piano keyboard. Um, Debbie was an enormous influence in that, with the way in which she used the guitar as an instrument to bring about sacred community. So now, cantorial students are required to learn how to play the guitar. And the cantorial school in HUC in general straddles a line between listening to what's going on in our congregations and leading what is going on in our congregations. And the congregations were speaking loud and clear after a number of years of, we want to be able to hear our own voices. We want to be able to capture that sacred community and the warmth and informality of the kind of communities that song leaders can build. And I think that what is now the Debbie Friedman School of Sacred Music, the cantorial school at HUC-JIR, is doing a tremendous job of bridging the gap, that we are not only guardians of tradition, which was the big phrase when I was a cantorial student, to guard the tradition. Now it's creating tradition and renewing tradition and being innovative in order to bring about the spirit that inspired Debbie, and to for each of us to find that inside of ourselves, and how important that is to being a clergy person.
It's so important to take those traditions and bring them forward, making them contemporary and useful to us today, and that we can relate to them. And I think that, for me, that's what Debbie did. Is she didn't just write something out of the air. She took prayers and Talmud and other writings and made them contemporary and accessible, so that we as cantors can use them in our congregations and teach and embrace the tradition today. But one of the things that I love about a lot of Debbie's music is that she embraces healing. And she really influenced, I think, healing in our life cycles. There's a quote by Debbie where she says, "When disaster befalls us, we have the option to withdraw or to attempt to transform the experience into a teacher for ourselves, our friends, our families, and our communities. Our personal disaster may not only be our gift, it may sometimes be another's gift as well. And it is our obligation to discover these gifts and give them to others." So thinking about that, what are the lessons that Debbie left you about healing and worship and music?
I think that Debbie taught us to take ourselves as musicians and song leaders and cantors seriously. That we held the hearts and spirits, and we do hold the hearts and spirits of our congregants in our hands. And it is a journey. Life is a journey that we are on together, that Debbie wrote from her own experiences, and what she said in the quotation you just shared, that it's our responsibility to share our own experiences with others, to show vulnerability, to communicate as clearly as possible about really important things. One thing that I didn't mention before is Debbie was really one of the very first people to start singing liturgy in English. Her first piece that she ever wrote was her English setting of the Ve'ahavta, and Thou Shalt Love the Lord Thy God, because as a teenager, she didn't know what the Hebrew meant. She continued to study, however, for her entire life. She was fluent in Hebrew. She studied Torah and Talmud and commentaries on prayer constantly. And so her music became a kind of midrash, modern interpretation of Hebrew texts, some in Hebrew and some in English. And so she raised our own level of connection to the liturgy much higher than it had been before, with her takes on the liturgy itself.
So, that being said, would you mind sharing with us a piece of liturgy that Debbie wrote music for?
I'd love to. Debbie understood very clearly the flow of a service. When she wrote a piece of liturgy, she knew what prayers were coming before, what prayers were coming after, where were we in our emotional journey. And one of the moments that oftentimes we don't pay a whole lot of attention to, we sing before the Amidah begins, Adonai sifatai tiftach ufi yagid tehilatecha. Adonai, open my lips so that my mouth may declare your praise. That all rolls off my tongue as a cantor. I'm sure it does yours as well, pretty easily. And Debbie didn't want us to pray by default or pray on automatic pilot. So she took that prayer, that kavanah, intentional statement before the Amidah, and this is what she did with it, in order that we might be reawakened to what that moment in the service is really about. This is called O God. Oh God, as I stand before you, I ask for strength and for courage as I take time to look at myself. May I open my lips in prayer, and God, as I stand alone, I pray my heart will sing out to you so many thoughts and fears that I have. May I open my lips in prayer. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Adonai sfatai tiftach. Ufi yagid tehilatecha. Baruch atah Adonai.
Oh
So
my
she knew
gosh.
exactly where she wanted it to go, and she knew exactly the emotion that she was hoping to bring forth from people.
She really did. As I listened to you sing those words, the melody, it made me feel like, oh, we're ready for the Amidah. It was so authentic and real and true and beautiful.
And while it's a communal moment, she makes it absolutely personal to each of us.
Right. I love that, because as we individually pray in Judaism, we pray as a community. And in that piece, it was so clear. And oh, I have to do that now. So, get ready, everybody out there. We're going to be singing that on Friday nights, getting ourselves ready for the Amidah. But beyond prayers and interpreting prayers, what do you think was her legacy? Like, what was really important to Debbie?
I think I mentioned it before, and I do think that it is her integrity, her honesty. She pushed herself really hard. I think many of us know she was not always in the best of health, and it never stopped her from being all that she could be as a communal leader, as an inspirational and creative voice, challenging us to keep being our best selves, to keep growing, to keep making sure that our Judaism and our Jewish music was reflective of our actual experience. And keeping it relevant in every generation is not an easy task. And she made sure that it happened in her generation and sparked a number of composers who are now the thousands of melodies that are out there for people to choose from, the right melodies at the right moments. This is Debbie's legacy. She really was a chalutza pioneer, a chalutza in this, and it can't be forgotten. It can't even be articulated, the depth of the changes that she made in American Jewry and liberal Jewry all over the world. one of the things that I mentioned before was how learned she was about text. And I have studied some Hasidic texts, maybe all of us have, where the Hasidic Rebbes had a real gift for taking one verse of Torah from here and a verse of Psalms from here and something that another rabbi said from here and combining it all to make a point. And Debbie did that with music. And with your permission, I'd love to share one more song and tell you a little bit about it.
We, of course, would love to hear another song from you.
Thank you. So many of us are aware of the quote from Rabbi Hillel, Im eina nili mili, in English, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? If I'm only for myself, what am I? And if not, now when? Debbie took this Hebrew text and she combined it with a text from our Haggadah, from our Passover Seder, that says, B'chol dor vador chayav adam lirot et atzmo ke'ilu hu yatsa mitzrayim. In English, this means in every single generation, each of us is obligated to see ourselves as if we personally came forth from Egypt. And these two texts, both about our responsibility to others in the world, she combined into a single melody, and I'd love to share it with you now. It's funny, the melodies that we know of Debbie's are the ones that we can catch on to very easily. This one's a little bit more complicated, which is why it's also one of my favorites. Im eina nili mili, ukshani latzmi ma'ani, ve'hivu akshav, ei matai, ei matai. Im eina nili mili, ukshani latzmi ma'ani, ve'hivu akshav, ei matai, ei matai. Bechol dor vador hayav adam lirot et atzmo ke'ilu hu yatsa miMizrayim. Im eina nili mili ukshani latzmi ma'ani ve'hivu akshav ei matai, ei matai. Bechol dor vador hayav adam lirot et atzmo ke'ilu hu yatsa miMizrayim. Im eina nili mili ukshani latzmi ma'ani ve'hivu akshav ei matai, ei matai. Ve'hivu akshav ei matai, ei matai.
So beautiful. And what a timeless message, right? And what a relevant message as we are all in our homes trying to stay safe and yet take care of each other and take care of ourselves. And we are so blessed to have had you join us this evening. I can't thank you enough. I hope you are well and happy, and sending blessings to you and your family.
It is great to be with you. Thank you again so much for inviting me. Take care.
You too. I'd like to end this evening with Debbie's Angel's Blessing, which is based on the text of prayers said before going to sleep at night. Debbie once said, "Nothing could give me greater pleasure than knowing some of my songs could put a child to sleep and be calm." This evening, I hope the words and melody of Angel's Blessing bring you peace and calm and a restful evening. Laila Tov.
May our right hand bring us closer to our godliness. May our left hand give us strength to face each day. And before us may our visions light the paths ahead. And behind